So in this video, we're going to look at the book of First Kings. So just like First and Second Samuel, First and Second Kings were originally on one scroll, but then when it was translated from Hebrew into Greek, it was too big to fit on one scroll, so they arbitrarily split the book. So today we're going to look at First Kings. So let's look at our 8 questions, answer our 8 questions. Okay, who wrote the book of First Kings? And again, we don't know. There's no firm internal or external evidence. Several people think that either Jeremiah, the prophet Jeremiah, or Ezra, the priest and scribe, wrote the book of First Kings. But again, we're not sure. Okay, who was it written to? Well, it was written to the nation of Israel after they had gone into captivity. And it was telling them, this is why you're in captivity. This is what happened to cause God to send you into captivity as punishment for your sin. But there are rich lessons for all of mankind for all ages. When we think about how much time is covered in the book of First Kings, it's approximately 120 years. So now let's think about the main idea of First Kings. First Kings opens with the kingdom being in the height of its glory. David is 70 years old, but he's not in good health. So one of his sons is determined to be king, but that's not the person that God had chosen to succeed David. It was Solomon. God and David both said that Solomon was going to be the one that would reign in his place. So eventually Solomon does become king, and he is reigning over the whole nation of Israel. And he starts out strong, and he's obeying God. And then it details the 7 years that it took Solomon to build the grand temple there in Jerusalem. But then in chapter 11 of First Kings, we see everything begin to unravel with Solomon. And it details his downfall. And he's drawn away from following God when he marries women, lots of women, and he starts practicing or dabbling in idolatry. So as a result, God takes the kingdom from Solomon, and a division results. You have, instead of one united kingdom, you have 2 kingdoms. And then spiritual conditions also deteriorate very quickly. Now let's think about some notable characters found in the book of First Kings. David, Solomon, the Queen of Sheba, Rehoboam, and that was Solomon's son who ruled in his place, Jeroboam, then Asa, who was a king in Judah, and then Ahab, who was a very wicked, evil king in Israel, and then the prophet Elijah. So now let's think about some notable events that happens in the book. Solomon reigns after David is unable to continue as king. David dies. Solomon prays for wisdom. The Lord appears to Solomon 2 times. God gives Solomon wisdom. Solomon builds a temple. Solomon marries 700 women, and he has 300 concubines. They turn his heart from following God. Rehoboam, who remember was Solomon's son, reigns in his place, and the kingdom divides, and Rehoboam rules in the south, and he is over the tribe of Judah and the tribe of Benjamin. Jeroboam rules over the remaining tribes, and he rules in the northern kingdom. So in chapter 12, we see some grave mistakes that Rehoboam makes. He worships the wrong object in the wrong place. He establishes people as priests that God had never given authority to be priests, and he worships on the wrong day. And Israel never fully recovers from these things that Jeroboam did, and there's never again another righteous king in the kingdom of Israel. We see Elijah's contest with the false prophets of Baal at Mount Carmel. We see the call of Elisha to take over for Elijah, and evil King Ahab takes the vineyard of Naboth, and God condemns Ahab for that, and Ahab dies in battle. And that's where First King ends. It ends with the death of Ahab. Now let's think about where on our timeline we find First Kings. First Kings chapter 1, verse 1 through chapter 12 and verse 15, the kingdom is united. But then First Kings 12, verse 16 through the end of the book, the kingdom is divided. So when we think about Jesus in the book of First Kings, there's no real clear prophecies. Again, we just see the seed line. All the kings of Judah would have been in Jesus' seed line. But again, it just really drives home the idea of an a need for a perfect king because these kings are so wicked and they're so evil, and things are just really running amok with this division and sin. And then when we get to the New Testament, also we see how Jesus feels about division and how he feels about unity. The night that he was betrayed, the day before he was crucified, there's a long prayer, and I'm going to start in verse 20. This is John chapter 17, verse 20. I do not ask for these only, but also for those who believe in me through their word. So that would be you and I today. That they may all be one, just as you, Father, are in me and I in you. That they may also be in us, so that the world may believe that you have sent me. So one of Jesus's last prayers or last requests, you almost want to say dying wish, would that all believers would be unified. And we see just the horrible result of division when we read 1 Kings. So that's something that we need to strive for today. And if we use the Bible as our standard, there could be a lot more unity than there is today. So let's finish up by asking why even study 1 Kings. And I have 3 takeaway points. And there's a lot more. It's just chock full of really good application for today. But the first one is Solomon had the Lord appear to him 2 times. And in one of those appearances, God said, ask for anything and I'll give it to you. So today, we might be prone to think, wow, if God appeared to me 2 times, face to face, and gave me anything I wanted, I would be faithful. I would just stick to him no matter what. But we see that wasn't the case with Solomon, that his heart was turned away by women, by marrying the wrong types of women and getting involved in their idolatry. So we can never just think that we've done enough or enough spiritual things have happened to us and we don't have to keep making those everyday decisions that are going to keep us close to God. Also, we see that we are one generation from things deteriorating spiritually. When Solomon was at the height of his reign and they were building the kingdom and there was economic prosperity, there was no wars. Things were just going just fantastically well. But again, when Rehoboam took over for Solomon, things unraveled quickly, and you have wars again, and you have sin, and you have division, and it can just happen just so quickly. Also, we see the sin of Jeroboam, all the things that he did with the wrong worship and the wrong object of worship in the wrong place, the wrong day, the wrong priest, and all that. That really just set the stage for Israel for the next 100 years until they went into captivity. They eventually went into Assyrian captivity. That we'll see that in Second Kings. But just that one-man decision just had such an awful legacy. So we need to be mindful that we are not laying the pattern or groundwork for a bad legacy in our family, but instead we need to be mindful of creating good legacies and a good pathway for the generations to come. So I hope this has been helpful. When and if you decide to tackle 1 Kings, I would suggest you have a chart of some kind that has the kings of Judah and the kings of Israel listed, because it can be quite confusing to just read 1 Kings without any kind of reference, because it mixes up, the text mixes up the kings of Judah and the kings of Israel. And in my mind, it was always hard to keep them straight. But when I had that visual aid, it made it much easier. And I will link that here in the comments for you to print off or to download on a device. So I hope this has been helpful, and next time we will look at